has definitely been one of those weeks for us. But apparently, it's not just us. According to a study out of Duke Divinity School's Clergy Care Initiative, pastors experience about twice the rates of depression as the average U.S. population. Based on 1,700 interviews of United Methodist pastors, they found that United Methodist pastors have about a depression rate of between 8 and 11%, depending if the survey was done online or over the phone. That compares to 5.5% in the general population. The study attributes this to things like the difficulty of living up to a divine call, the various expectations placed on clergy both by themselves and by their congregations, and the almost complete absence of work-life balance at times. So, based that we all work in various ministry jobs and plan to continue in that, do y'all connect with this in your own context?
Well, I mean, we only work 2 hours a day every Sunday, so why do we need to be depressed?
Yeah,
Wait a tick. I haven't worked 2 hours on a Sunday in my ministerial job. I think it's the idea that... What is that noise? Oh, that's probably an ad.
It is, but where is it coming from?
It's coming from the production. Oh, it's Fancy Feast. And
Kitties!
that is the reason we're all depressed.
We don't have enough cats.
We're back on the rails.
We have too many cats. No, it's just...
I only have 2.
It's just the fact that I think there's a huge disconnect between what people in the ministry actually do and what the idea that people in ministry do, because I don't know about you, but when I was just a church member, I wasn't at the church during office hours or during, another programming, maybe like a Wednesday night program or a Thursday or a Monday. I was there Sunday I didn't go to Sunday school. I was there Sundays from 11 to noon. And then I went promptly to the Golden Corral, because that's what you do. And it's just, there's an idea that, the congregants may have, I know I had, is that people who work in church are only there part-time. It's not a full-time thing. They're volunteers. They want to do this. And therefore, they don't have anything blocking them from dealing with my stuff. So it's easy for congregants, and I'm guilty of this too, saying, you've got plenty of time. All you have to do is write a sermon. And then I went to seminary, and I worked in a church, and turns out that's not all they do. So I think that's one part of it.
But even just that, even if it is just write a sermon, that's...
Hours, people. Hours and hours and hours.
A rule of thumb that a mentor of mine taught me, and it's not actually a rule I keep to, but it gives you a gauge, is that for every minute of finished sermon is like an hour of prep. So if you assume the average Methodist sermon is 15 to 20 minutes, 30 if we're really pushing it, that's between 15 and 30 hours of work. So that's like half to 2/3 of a normal work week. Just into this one thing. Now for me, my sermon prep's more like, I'm having to do it really quickly because I'm not just a pastor, but my sermon prep is still 6 to 8 hours of work on a given week for a 15 to 20 minute sermon. And that's part-time. So if you're assuming I'm part-time, I should be working 20 hours a week. That's roughly half to 25% of my week is spent just on the sermon. But I also think some of it is just depression runs high in a lot of caring professions. Mm-hmm. And some of it goes beyond just the workload and the work-life balance. It's you're taking on other people's stuff.
Yeah.
And you're standing in the midst of that, and you feel a very high expectation to take on other people's stuff. And I'm not actually speaking out against that. But what I'm saying is there needs to be a intentional regime of self-care that goes with that in order to truly be effective. I have a professor at Candler, Dr. Ellison, who takes pride that he's recommended over 50 students, soon to be clergy, to therapy. And it doesn't get talked a lot about, but I think that most pastors should be in therapy.
Most people should be in
Most people
therapy.
should be in therapy, sure. But certainly most pastors. Just to be able to deal and process with the stuff you take on and the stuff that gets thrown at you, right? So a lot of times, and I'm in the honeymoon period with my current church, and so it's all, essentially goodness and light. But a lot of things get hurled at you, right? I've been called an enemy of the gospel. You get called terrible things, your work gets picked apart, and that also adds to the weight you're carrying, and why I think all pastors should be in therapy.
I think also, and this is something I don't know that I realized, I'm still technically a layperson, but I'm seeking ordination. And I worked as a full-time layperson in the church for 2 years before I went to seminary. And what I notice doing seminary and working, and I think is this way vocationally for pastors, there is no part of your being that does not get used in this work. So it can be physically exhausting. Anyone who's ever worked Vacation Bible School can attest to that. So it's physically exhausting. So you're using your body, you're using your mind. In writing a sermon, you're interpreting difficult texts and thinking about church history. So there's a lot of intellectual stuff that goes on. And you use, obviously, your spirit. It can be emotionally draining when you're dealing with people in times of crisis. So there's nothing, I feel like there is no part of my being that does not get used and not infrequently wrung out in this kind of work. And so I think that might be a source of some of this. When you feel like your entire being is in service, and since those needs never go away. Pastoral needs do not go away because it's 5 o'clock or 10 o'clock or 3 a.m. on Christmas. That need is still there. So there's this sort of constant, this large amount of energy that it requires, but then also it never stops. And I think that's probably a source of it.
It is. It's kind of, and that's actually what you just mentioned. The idea of it never stopping is something that was brought up in the Duke study. That it is this kind of all-encompassing thing. And one thing they pointed out that I thought was really interesting is most jobs, when you finish at the end of the day, if the day didn't go well, okay, fine, whatever. The researcher says, I'm a researcher. And so when I go home and my research didn't go well, I go, oh, well, that's just a day, I'll do better tomorrow. But because clergy feel a divine calling to this and feel that you are kind of mediating a divine human relationship, to put a huge theological spin on it, but you are trying to connect people with God. And so the responsibility gets amped up. So if you feel like you said the wrong thing, have you poisoned their relationship with God? Have what you said misrepresented God? And so it becomes this kind of feedback loop that it's hard to have a bad day. And when you have a bad day, it leads to much more fundamental questioning that, when I was a teacher, I was like, I blew that. Pfft, we'll get it back tomorrow. But it's harder, the Duke study points out that it's harder for clergy to do that because of kind of the degree that your theology gets wrapped up in how well you can do your job. And I thought that was interesting in particular, that it kind of reinforces how bad things can feel.
That's interesting. I get that. I do. But I almost wonder if that's a misunderstanding on the part of clergy of the role of the pastor. If we think that the words out of our mouth are divine words, not that that's what that's saying, but this idea that, like, if we say something wrong, we really screw people up. Like, yes, we do have to, I think pastors do have to be really careful, but I almost wonder if we think about ourselves not as mediating the divine presence, but inviting people to experience it. If that, and I'm not clergy, so I haven't done this, but I wonder if maybe that's a little bit of what's going on with this level of anxiety about that. That if some of it is our misunderstanding of, and on the part of congregations too, like, I think that's very much there, that congregations perhaps have expectations of the role of the pastor, and I think particularly in American consumer churches, that the pastor is somehow the one who dispenses the divine presence
Sure.
instead of inviting people to experience what's already there.
But I mean, even if it is inviting rather than dispensing, there is still a level of responsibility there that is hard to ignore and hard to step away from, right? That, okay, if you didn't do it right, you didn't issue the right invitation, there's still, I mean, there's still risk, and there's still a sense you can really mess people up. And so, you know, I don't know how much I connect with that. I just thought it was interesting that the Duke study pointed it out.